Most parents are doing one or two things right now. They're either handing their kids an AI tool, calling it education, or they're banning it entirely, hoping the problem goes away. I've spent the last few years building AI systems for companies that work with some of the largest enterprises in the world. So I understand AI to a very deep degree. But those businesses that I work with need to understand AI, not just work with it. And that's exactly what I'm also teaching my kids. What I'm actually teaching them has nothing to do with prompts or tools, or which LLM is the best technology. It's something much harder. And it's the only thing that will matter when AI replaces so much of the traditional school system. Look, I think the protection here and what I'm trying to protect is the formation layer of thinking. AI is wonderful at helping you get answers quickly, but childhood is not only about getting answers. It's about building the inner machinery that helps you arrive at one. When a child writes by hand, counts on an abacus, breaks numbers down, works on something on paper, gets bored, gets stuck, tries again, that isn't inefficiency. That's cognition that's being built. That is the patience, pattern recognition, memory, self-correction, and a relationship with effort that's all compounding quietly in the background. It's also why sport is so important for children. Now, sports like tennis, for example, allow children to understand they have to manage three very different sets of muscles. There's a muscle around thinking strategically, there's a muscle around they're tired, and there's a muscle around emotion. And actually having them go through something slowly and understand the real provenance around those three is so powerful. I worry that AI can remove too much of that productive friction too early because the craft barrier ultimately has been collapsed. And if a child gets used to instant output before they've built inner depth of intent, they may become very capable on the surface, but really quite fragile underneath. They may become really fast, but not rooted, fluent, but not original. So when I say slow things down, I'm not being nostalgic. I'm trying to predict and protect their ability to sit with a problem long enough that it changes them just a little bit and it compounds over time. That's what I don't want us to lose. It's not just intelligence that we're getting from a system, but it's intelligence that we're earning. And I think you have to take a step back to also realize that the fundamentals of the school system was around an economy of scarcity. We're entering an economy of abundance in the coming years. And so the whole economics of what school was, how it was designed to train the workforce of the future, that's all changing. And one of the things I've sort of spoken to friends about recently has been, we're so used to a system where 90% of kids will go out, maybe 95%, and they'll work for a human leader. What we're not used to is the fact that 98% of kids will now graduate and they'll work for a machine that works for the 2%. And that 2% is very different than 2% from before, because the 2% from before may have been generational, it may have been evolutionary in a business. I'd say a large portion of this 2% will actually be people know how to yield the AI and yield the machine and know how to think about deep problems and break them down, which goes back to exactly why you want to build the elasticity of slow speed into the minds of children. Before I go deeper into this, if you run a company or lead a team, the problem is probably costing you far more than you realize. Most organizations lose hundreds of hours a year simply because knowledge inside the company is fragmented across tools, systems, documents, conversations, and whatnot. I put together a free research briefing called the AI Memory Gap that explains why this happens, why current AI tools still struggle with organizational knowledge, and the new architecture that's emerging to solve it. If you want to understand how this will change how companies operate over the next couple of years, not even a decade, you can download the free briefing in the description below. Look, as the craft barrier collapses, the intent barrier is the most important area. And what do I mean by that? Producing a song, making a presentation, writing an essay, all became a lot easier, but the quality of that outcome depends so much now on the intent and the planning and the thinking and how well you thought through what you really want to cover. And the tension is that ease is good for output, but not always good for development, not always good for really producing something world-class. The craft barrier collapsing means it's just much easier to do things, right? Essays, code, music, images, presentations, even ideas in rough form. And that's amazing. It's democratized capability. But the danger is that we're confusing making with becoming. Historically, the struggle of the craft did two things at once. It helped you produce something, yes, but it also helped produce you. Repetition shaped taste, friction built stamina, limitation forced invention. When that friction disappears and you can get an artifact without necessarily getting the internal growth that used to come with it, the thinking that you had to do beforehand, there's a real risk. It sounds a lot of like blah, And you start to see this already in some of the social media posts. They all sound the same. And so I'm not anti-AI, not at all. I was sort of part of a crew that, was building this world, and I love the tools. But I think we have to be honest. When the machines remove too much of the effort, it can also remove some of the hidden compounding that is so helpful, so powerful for the development of children. And this means the job of us as parents, job of teachers, we have to decide very consciously, where do we want speed and where do we want struggle? Because not every shortcut is progress. And I think the world we're in now, the speed at which it's evolving, you always had a lag between what the kids were learning in school, especially earlier years, and then what was actually happening or in practice in the real world or in the workplace. I think now that's become even bigger. And so the problem we have is the teaching that's happening, as great as it is, can never teach the latest tools, because the latest tools are evolving now by the day or by the hour. But what it can do is it can teach and reinforce the core fundamental values that are important for education: the grit, the stamina, the invention, the power of scarcity, and really help them think through that. When I think about that 2%, the leaders who will lead the machines, who then have large human teams that work with them or for them, future really belongs neither to someone who's purely cerebral, nor to someone that's purely an optimized machine user. And I think that's the conundrum. I think the future belongs to people and minds who are broad in thinking and grounded in body, curious across domains, but disciplined in practice, able to think conceptually, but can also act with precision and energy. It's almost like you took Roger Federer and Da Vinci and sort of merged them into one. And the Da Vinci side is curiosity, synthesis, drawing ideas from different fields, asking strange questions, connecting things that didn't obviously seem like they needed to be connected. And the Federer side is repetition, discipline, control, balance, training, resilience, rhythm, the understanding that mastery is embodied, but not just intellectual. And so day to day, for me as a parent, it means a few things. It means I want my kids to read, draw, write, question, build mental models. But I also want them moving, training, competing, understanding how loneliness feels, understanding what it feels like to have your back against the wall, learning that discipline that lives in the body as much as the one that lives in the head. It also means not letting them become passive consumers of infinite digital convenience and experience. I want them to experience boredom, use their hands, learn the hard things, practice, iteration. One of the most important things, and I feel like the mobile phone era has really put this to test, is delayed gratification. I want them to know that some of the best things in life only reveal themselves slowly. Because in an AI world, the edge won't be just knowing things. It'll be the kind of person who can direct intelligence, including machine intelligence, with clarity, energy, and character. So we have this fun, let's call it family project. It's a digital piggy bank, which has evolved to be a lot more than a digital piggy bank. And a part of it is I'm building it with the kids. And the problem I'm trying to solve is something very simple. I don't want AI to be a machine that they go to for entertainment, passive consumption, shortcuts. I also want them to learn how the thing gets built and how much time we had to spend on intent and thinking, and actually how when we quickly jumped to building, we skipped some of the really important, formidable steps around what we wanted to do, how do we want the exact behavior to behave, and those little steps actually matter so much. As for the system itself, I really want my kids and the family as such now to experience it as something that can reinforce agency, reflection, and accountability. One of the things that I've realized as a parent is, you tell the kids, need you to do this, read this book, so on and so forth. And how much do we actually follow up on it? Now, good parents follow up on it a lot. Most parents follow up on it in the middle. And the problem is that stuff gets left to the side. And so kids aren't closing the loop enough. And then that develops into habits and behaviors later in life. And so we're using the piggy bank and then actually using the AI that we're building at Second Brain Cora, not to replace parenting, but it's there to create a kind of structured feedback and loops around creating habits, learning, effort. So for example, if they do their bed, if they do their homework, if they finish a book, they can answer some questions about what they read. If they reflected properly, it'll get noticed, it gets scored, they earn something, they feel happy, they're getting used to this mechanism, and it's compounding, right? It's linking effort to a reward in a consistent way. And look, I think the piggy bank concept in itself really matters a lot because it's around getting children to understand accumulation. They understand points, progress, visible compounding, how I've done this this and this, and now look what I've got. But it also gets them to understand investment. One of the things that we've put into it is if you have lessons that are like tennis or music, you use some of your digital currency to buy the lesson. Then if the teacher says you did a great job, you actually get double of it back. If you gave some of those credits or those points to a charity, which then get converted into real currency, you almost get double the value or triple the value. So it's a great way to also teach kids, where are the right things for them to be making investments. And I think that's actually one of the most powerful lessons in life, where to make the right investment. And more importantly, small repeated steps actually becomes your identity, becomes your behavior. There was a professor I studied with, BJ Fogg, and he always talked about the tiny habits. And actually a part of what we're trying to do with the piggy bank is to build tiny habits in everything that kids are doing in their day to day. And so that they have excitement around it as well. And what I really like about Quora in all of this is that it makes the invisible act a bit more tangible. But look, the deeper point is this. I'm trying to use AI not as a substitute human formation, but really as a scaffold around it, and not do it for them, but help them reinforce the right loops so that we can then think about not necessarily closing the loops, which we can now do in a digest form, but not every single loop, but we can spend our time thinking about what are the new things that we want the kids to learn, what are the new identities we want them to form, what are the new skills we want to propagate within them. And in a strange way, the system is really less about automation and more about intentionality. It's a way of saying these habits matter. You've got to really feel like the lessons you do, you're spending on them, that reflection is important after doing something, and that, effort and outcome both count. And look, these lessons also apply to teams and employees. Click here to watch the next video.